Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our TGT podcast series, our weekly show after every single Arsenal League game on a weekend, where I'm joined by some wonderful people to discuss some wonderful fixtures. And my God, did we get a wonderful game yesterday? We're going to talk all about the fantastic, beautiful nature of beating Jose Mourinho and Spurs. How great these two things are now combined, and we can enjoy beating them together. Wonderful stuff. I said I was joined by some wonderful people, and I certainly am. I'm joined by, first of all, Raph. Raph, how you doing, mate? Are you well? Oh, no. Oh, no. The worst. I've got all the new graphics work fine. And Raph has left the building. Hopefully we can get Raph back in a second. That was so good. Johnny, save me, mate. How are you doing, mate? Are you well?
I'm not doing too bad now. I love the fact that you gave him that big build-up as well. And the facial expression it stuck on was just one of complete apathy. Like, Raph, how you doing?
Yeah, I think he might be back now. I think he's going to come back in just a second. Deary me, that was so close to being great. Drew, I'm going to get used to throwing this screen around soon. I need to be a little bit on it like a proper producer now. But Drew, mate, are you good? Are you well, son?
Yeah, I'm good, and I have no bandana today, so...
No. So you're going to get plenty of comments on your hair, and I'll be looking out for the other band comparison very, very soon. But no, good to have on the show, mate. And we should now have Raph back in the building. How are you doing, mate? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel like this is going to be one of them days again, but let's see how it goes. I'm not going to let it kill my vibe, though.
So that's good.
Cool. All right, cool. We'll take it. We'll take it for the minute. But yeah, happy days. Good result. Buzzing. But I'm sure we're going to talk.
We are indeed, mate. I love how your internet freezes your screen on the most hilarious of facial expressions. Deary me. Obviously, it was an amazing day yesterday to get the result against those lot down the road, and we're going to get your thoughts and reactions to it. First off, Johnny, just beating them lot in the league, beating Mourinho as well. What were your raw reactions to the win?
Listen, absolutely delighted, to be fair. I was, I'm not going to be alone as an Arsenal fan when you circle this fixture, and it is the standout fixture. And in a league campaign which has been as disappointing as this, you look for, shoots of life, reasons to be optimistic moving forward. And I think, Tottenham have their vulnerabilities as well, as has been clearly there to see for everyone for quite some time now. They're similar to us in that respect, that they'll always potentially give you a goal, but they rely on, Harry Kane brilliance or whatever to get them out of jams. And ultimately, I thought it was always going to be about guts and about, our application to be able to get anything out of that game. And I thought the way we set about it, the tactics, the way that the players applied themselves was absolutely superb, and it made it so much more important a victory because of the performance. If we had just stolen a 1-0, that would be, I'd take it, still bite your hand off. But the fact is, we deserved to win that game, and it was very, very good to watch from Arsenal's perspective.
It was indeed. It was just a fantastic kind of dominant display, one that we've been asking for against not only Spurs, but of course a lot of big sides, especially after that Manchester City game where it felt like they barely needed to get out of second gear to get a victory over us. To know the fact that we could dominate that game, get the result, take the chances that we did create for ourselves, even though we did miss a fair few chances too. Drew, coming to you, mate, and talking about kind of the reaction to a lot of stuff that happened. It was more than just the result. There was, of course, some incidents before the game that we'll get onto a little bit later on. But the lineup was an interesting one. One change was forced. But it was interesting to obviously see players like Cedric come in at right back, see obviously Tierney we expect to see start every game, but this Luiz-Gabriel partnership has kind of solidified itself as maybe Arsenal's best duo. What did you make of the defensive setup of the team?
I think it made sense, and there's always going to be debate about, Cedric and Bayern and who should be first choice and whatnot. So if we talk about that, it could be later. But I think for me, it's telling that he's now put complete faith in Gabriel and Luis, and for lack of a better term, they should be. I think on balance, they should be viewed as the first choice pairing. And center back is one of those things where you don't want to constantly rotate them in the first place. Once you find a pair that works and it gives you everything you need in terms of the technical and tactical requirements, you stick with it. Even bigger clubs who have, they might have 3 or 4 good center backs. They don't rotate them without the need to, whether if it's fitness concerns or if there is match congestion, they'll maybe pull one of them out, not both. But I think it shows the right amount of faith from the manager. I think it shows that they have come on strong. I do think Gabriel probably also needs Luis there next to him in the first place for one or two reasons. It is his first season in the Premier League. His English isn't great, things like that. So obviously that helps, but they do play well together. And you saw that against Spurs. I don't remember a period at any point where I was actually concerned, considering, the forward line that Spurs do have. If they're on song on any given day, that's a very dangerous front four to contend with. And I was completely confident going into the match. I think that shows the progression that we all would have wanted, A, first and foremost, but B, it's commensurate with what we actually have seen tangibly throughout the season. The reason why we have the 4th best defensive record in the league at the moment. Gabriel and Luis are a big part of that when they're fit. So, and because we just have Europa League to contend with now, and we don't know how far we're going to go in that, I want to see that pairing as much as humanly possible, because continuity in your match day 11 is absolutely vital if you want to be successful in the long term of the season. You shouldn't rotate unless you have to, so I'm happy with that. I do think Bayern and Cedric will probably rotate, especially, I don't think Bayern's at 100% post his injury. So we're going to see Cedric by default, I think. And that doesn't have to go deeper into the debate of who's better or who's not. I just want both of them to perform when they're in the side. I thought Cedric played well. So that's all that really matters. It doesn't mean I think one should start more of the other. I think whoever's in form should play, and when you need to rotate them, you have to rotate them. But I think I'm just happy with how everybody played, and we're all happy with how Tierney plays every week. So there's nothing much to say about Tierney in the first place. So yeah, I was pleased with it, and I thought the results sort of spoke for itself.
Speaking about the defence, we do have something to share with our members in the chat box. Of course, they do have access to use the fun emojis. And today we added a new one. Drew was not amused, it's fair to say, when I showed him this earlier. But Cedric has been added as requested by a lot of our fantastic members to the array of emojis available to you to use in the chat. So you asked, we delivered. You've now got a Cedric emoji. So there you go. And I hope you enjoy using it. But it's been a fantastic time to see, obviously, Cedric rise into the first team. But Raph, talking about the midfield, Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, those two together have seemingly worked kind of in tandem. I mean, Xhaka's been playing not only out of his shoes, but he's been playing every single week to the point where he probably does justify the need for footballers to have new boots every single game, because he just keeps getting picked. And he's playing consistently since the turn of the new year after kind of a troubled start. But him and Partey together kind of dominated that midfield, didn't they?
Yeah, I think there was big talk because and obviously maybe this is just me putting my Arsenal hat on, but I feel like the Tottenham midfield has been praised a lot this year. Like Højbjerg, all of a sudden from Southampton to Tottenham became world class. Ndombele, who I think's definitely improved from his first season. But I feel like there was a lot of talk like they would potentially dominate the midfield battle. And I just think that when you look at how Partey and Xhaka played, and I'm surprised to say in particular Xhaka, I think Xhaka was very good yesterday. I think Partey was good, especially initially, but I think he did fade, if I'm honest, and made some mistakes towards the end of the game. Just kind of like game management stuff. I think maybe fitness was a big part of that, but I think I can see that there's room to improve, even though he played really well. But I mean, hats off to them in general. I think they dictated the tempo of the game. I think they controlled the midfield. I think they controlled the ball, and it allowed us to basically just put a foothold in the game, which I think has sometimes been an issue. And also in transition, where Tottenham are normally quite good, I felt Partey was good at breaking up play. I felt Xhaka bought fouls at the right time and things like that. So I think all in all, and then it allowed Ødegaard to find pockets of space, to find little bits in play, and Smith Rowe in particular to really start to just put a foothold on the game and just control the game and play our way. So I think the midfield, you can see a lot of positives going forward. It would be an area I would strengthen in the summer, but obviously for now, I would definitely say that Xhaka, we criticize him a lot when he does well, when he does badly, but I think he did really well yesterday.
Yeah, I thought he was really, really good once again. Just keep on with that passing onto the left-hand side, utilising Tierney as best possible. It just works at the moment. And it doesn't, I mean, the drop-off in quality from those two to Ceballos and El Neni is I think, significant. I think Ceballos did really well towards the end of last season in kind of that combination with Granit Xhaka. But we've just moved on to a different plane with Partey coming in. We now get on to kind of the talking about the game, but before the game, something happened, and someone was dropped because they weren't being a good boy. It's fair to say, Johnny, to get your initial reaction on just obviously when you initially heard what had happened and what you've heard since, and then how you've reflected on the Aubameyang situation afterwards. What are your thoughts?
So the situation with Aubameyang is. I have some sympathy on this front, and that is that I think that, players are not robots. They have personal lives. And I think for me, it's quite clear that through some of the stuff that we've heard recently, Aubameyang's going through, I think it's had an impact on him. Again, he's not a robot. He's got emotions, and it seems like personal life is starting to have an impact with regards to his playing life at the moment. And ultimately, he looks distracted, basically. He does look distracted by things that are going on elsewhere. And ultimately, if that leads you to turning up late, and doing other things where it's not exactly being the model professional, and his role is even more in the spotlight because he's captain. If he was just star striker, that would be something. But you're the captain, and at the end of the day, when you're captain, you're the role model. People look to you for how to behave. And I think that ultimately at this stage, I do think that because of the quality of the player, there is obviously a future for him at Arsenal in the sense that he is our best finisher, and he absolutely, when playing well, provides something to our team and adds something to our team. But ultimately, in my opinion, him as a captain, I think that's done now. I think at the end of the day, if you're being dropped essentially for being unprofessional, I think you've got to take the armband as well. And let's be honest, this is not like taking the armband off Patrick Vieira, for spitting at Ruddock or something. Vieira is an actual captain. He led by example. Aubameyang's not a very good captain anyway. We just did it in a kind of PR move like we did to Henry in the past, where you give the armband as a bit of a signing on bonus. And I don't think he's ever been one that has particularly led well. So for me, I think just give it to Kieran Tierney and let's move on. At the end of the day, Kieran Tierney's a guy who represents everything about Arsenal, what we want to be doing, how we want to be moving forward, and the aggression and intensity that it needs to play for Arsenal Football Club. And ultimately, I think we've got an opportunity now to take that captaincy away from Aubameyang and not have it be a complete disaster. So I think they should do it and move it on to someone who's a bit more befitting of the role.
It's interesting to follow this on with the question for Drew, because on Twitter, we were actually sent a question from Colin McCreary, who says, Drew, you follow German football, more specifically Aubameyang, longer than I have. What are your thoughts on his behaviour, both historically and as it relates to yesterday's incident?
I'm surprised you didn't have an additional question after that, so I was kind of waiting for it. But yeah, and I'll be back on the camera in a minute. I'm trying to finish work.
I know what you do.
But yeah. So for me, I mean, I'm not surprised, and I was kind of joking with some of the people I know in the Dortmund fan base, and we were saying, it was only a matter of time before this sort of thing kind of popped up. And obviously, you want to give players the benefit of the doubt when they come to a new club. You hope behaviors change, and things started similarly well for Oba at Dortmund, but eventually over time there were a lot of clashes off the pitch with management, with Zorc and with Tuchel as well, and Mislintat. And it's kind of it was similar. Like he always felt the rules didn't really apply to him, turning up late for training was a thing that started to happen as well. Late for team briefings. Again, same thing. It's no different here. And for me, it was my only concern about signing him when we did wasn't the fact that he wasn't going to produce, because his track record shows literally the opposite. It's what Oba are we going to get out off the pitch? Is he going to remain in line? Is he going to show that level of maturity you kind of want? And again, for up until this the contract renewal, he did show it, at least that we know of. But now all of a sudden it's coming out that it's been multiple times that he's shown up late as captain. It's inexcusable. And as I talked about on the Yama podcast yesterday, Michael and I both have a lot of coaching experience. Jess and I have a lot of playing experience. And, when I was captain, my coach would have strangled me if I turned up late to training or to a team meeting. And as a coach, I expect all the players to arrive on time, if not early, and certainly the captain, because you're supposed to set that example, right? And he's one of the senior players in the side. And the youngsters have said that they do look to him as an example, amongst others. Him and Luis are prime examples, right? So, and if he just doesn't want to turn up on time and it's become a habit, it's setting the wrong example. So, I don't think you should strip him during the season. I think that's going to cause a whole host of other problems for the remainder of the term. But I think the summer is the perfect time to move on from him in a leadership role, and I don't think it ever suited him. People look to the fact that he wears the armband for Gabon, but who else is going to wear it for Gabon? He's the country's greatest ever player, essentially. So of course he's going to be captain, right? But it doesn't mean he is a captain. He's not. He wasn't in the leadership role at Dortmund. He wasn't considered for 1 year until, and as we just discussed, I think we all know why he was given the armband. I think it was more to placate, to get him to stay on in a moment of need where we wanted to retain our best goal scorer. So. And there's nothing wrong with changing captains from one year to the next. I think we have better leadership figures in the team. You have historic captains in the side right now. Jack has been captain since 22 at Gladbach, and captain Switzerland. He's been captain for Arsenal before. You could argue that Bayern has captain qualities. You could argue that maybe someone like Luis, because people look up to him as much as they do. Kieran Tierney, another prime example, maybe a longer term appointment. So. Yeah, overall, I'm trying not to rant about Oba himself, because I still think that under the right circumstances, he has a large role to play for Arteta and for the club as long as he's here. But I do think this is just another example of why he never should have been made captain, and why I was actually pretty furious that we actually did it. Because it's a continuous thing with him. Even if it's not continuous, it's not like an everyday thing. But eventually, stuff like this is going to happen when he feels comfortable and he feels like he's at the point where he can sort of, I don't know, like unbuckle the belt, so to speak. Things like this will happen, So yeah, I do feel like he should be shipped at the end of the season. And I think long term, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a role for the club. I just feel like part of the culture that Arteta is trying to establish is those non-negotiables. Also the intangibles, and then also accountability. Everybody, from the youngest player in the squad to Oba and Luis and the senior players in the squad. So if he's not capable of doing that, then he shouldn't be captain in the first place. And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I just feel like I wasn't surprised, and I'm happy he was dropped, because it shows that example. No one is above the law, because if you let Oba get away with it, what does that say to the other members of the squad? Then you are playing favorites, right? Or then, well, if Oba can do it, well, maybe I can do it. And then that's how you get issues in the dressing room. So yeah, so I think we'll be fine, but I'm not surprised, and we move on from here. There's bigger issues to worry about.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There is certainly bigger issues to worry about. Just before I get Raph's thoughts on this, drop into the chat box and see what you guys are saying. Hovik, thanks for the support as always, mate. He says Alba was probably made captain because the fans love him and the board had to get the fans back on side after the whole Xhaka incident. Of course, he was made captain at the time by Unai Emery rather than Arteta, and it was a decision that he kind of just took to continue on. It's a weird, isn't it? Like, you come into a club as a new manager, you have that moment where you've either got to take the captaincy away from someone and give it to someone new, which in itself, to a player like Aubameyang, you've got to think that the impacts on him going to be significant, and he probably just felt at the time it was best to move on. He's going to be here for another season or two and just deal with it when the time comes and give it to the next person, which we hope is someone like Kieran Tierney. Glenn Cook said Aubameyang is not a captain. He lacks the responsibility and mentality for it. He's an experienced player who is a popular figure in the dressing room, and that's it. Clayton says, although I think he'd be great at it, I don't think Katie is seen as a captain by the locker room quite yet. I'm not sure about that. I think he's looked upon as very much so as a person to look up to. Raph, finish off this section on just giving your thoughts on Aubameyang to close us out. Do you think it's as far as saying we could strip him of the captaincy, or is it just an incident that is going to be pushed under the rug now, moved on from, and we move to the next game?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think that we should strip him personally now. I do agree in that I don't personally think that he is the quote-unquote captain of the team. I think spiritually, in terms of like the actual leaders, are Luiz and Xhaka in the dressing room, and just how they conduct themselves. And even when you listen to some of the kids and stuff, I think that the way that they, I guess, dedicate every day and stuff like that, I think that they're the ones that are the examples within the team personally. I think with Aubameyang, it was, I think he's just the best player. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. I think he's been all right as captain, but I just think that this is I think bigger than this, the captaincy, I think is a really important time for Arteta, because I think that one thing that has been questioned about sometimes is there has been elements of man management where he's been quite, he's led kind of with an iron fist. You look at the Guendouzi incident, you look at Ozil, you look at Maitland-Niles. There's been a lot of incidents where you could argue that Arteta has been quite forthright with, the non-negotiables and how he's done it. And I think a player like Aubameyang, towing the line or not, because, if the reports are true and he did storm out 20 minutes after the game and he didn't warm up with the rest of the team, does he get fined again? Is there more disciplinary for that? How does he manage that? And I think that for Arteta, I think it's just a really interesting time. It would have been really hard for him if he lost that game. I think the fact that he won that game really is probably such a weight off of his shoulders, because all of the talk would have been Aubameyang's left. There was already talk about Martinelli not being in the squad, and then obviously I also don't necessarily agree with the fact that it was made public. But again, I just think it's going to be very interesting to see how it kind of holds. But I think it's a very, very important period for what Arteta's trying to do. And if he kind of loses this, I don't want to go as far to say it's a battle, because I don't think Aubameyang is going to just go AWOL or anything like that. But I think if he kind of loses Aubameyang, it will be interesting to see how the rest of the club or the rest of the players take it. So I'll be watching and I'll be interested. But I think it was the right decision. I don't think it should have been made public, but I think to set that marker down and say nobody's bigger than the team was a good thing. It would just be important to see how we move on from here.
So I just wanted to say, I take your point, Raph, and I think more often than not, I think 98.7% of the time, you and I actually agree. There's that odd 1% where we don't agree. But
I'm letting go away with this, Raph. You
like in the WhatsApp. But I think the thing for me, though, I think it's interesting, and I kind of want to get Johnny's thoughts on this as well. The fans have, for however many months now, or even years, have been crying out for that they want the transparency of decisions. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they want. So I think Arteta has given them that. And then fans are saying, well, maybe he shouldn't have made it public. Well, which one is it then? Yeah. Which one do you want? Do you want the transparency, or do you not want the transparency? Because you can't have transparency half the time, because then when you don't get it the other half of the time, it's going to be like, well, what are you hiding this time but you didn't hide last time? And you know how our fans can be fickle about how it's never good enough. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of like that he came out with, because I think holding people to accountability publicly, I think, especially when it's your captain, it's important, because when you're captain, you should already be more in the public eye than other players anyway. And I think someone brought it up in the chat before, and I forget who said it, but I think it ground a lot of people's gears. But the fact that when things were down and out, we were never hearing from Oba. We were always hearing from other players, but never the captain. And to me, that's awkward, because if you look at other leagues, like if you look in Bundesliga, you always see captains doing post-match interviews. Even at the worst of times, they hold themselves accountable and the team accountable in front of the fans. It's not, you know, some side thing on Instagram, or it's, you know what I mean, like it, or a tweet. It's very in your face, and that might not be part of the English footballing culture. But I feel like some of the fans would probably prefer that. So the fact that Arteta came out and said, "This is what it is. Here's what's happened." You know, I know the finer details came out through somebody else, like James from Gunner Blog said that this has been a repeat thing, right? Would we have known it was a repeat thing without James? Probably not. But I think it's better that we heard it up front, because now you know where Arteta stands, where, like, and what's expected of everybody, including your captain. I think that's an important part of that culture building that we weren't getting before, or at the very least in the final Wenger years, and probably under Emery to a certain extent. But I think Arteta did the right thing. I do agree with you that he would have been under pressure. Say we ran out and lost 3-0 and we were diabolical, right? Barely got any chances, didn't score a goal, Footlocker wasn't on it, whatever it may have been. I think the fans' ire would have turned on Arteta, but I think it would have been the wrong issue. I think the thing that wound me up so much is the fact that the fans wanted to find a stick to beat Arteta with, instead of looking at Oba and saying, your captain needs to do better. There were too many fans that were siding with Oba, and that was very weird to me. So I just wanted to know, where you guys stood on that portion of it, the fact that we were being transparent, whereas so many times before it was just like, well, what the hell is going on? And now we know exactly what's going on for the most part. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm going to say, so for me, you know, it's interesting what you say, Drew, and I think my view changed as it went as well. So initially, I thought that, you know, as potentially Raph alluded to, I thought it could have been I initially thought it could have been handled in a different way, and it was airing the dirty laundry in public when it was kind of unnecessary when it is such an influential player. And also, my initial thoughts were, if you want to prove a point by leaving him out, why is he even in the squad? You know, like just leave him completely out. If that's what you want to do, you've kind of gone half in, half out. It's you know, it's reflecting weakness when you're trying to show strength, because you're kind of like, oh, I might actually be getting done over in this and need him. So if, you know, at the end of the day, it is a significant game for him, and I do think if we lost this, Arteta would have been in pretty bad shape in terms of his outlook. Granted, we would get through in the Europa League anyway, but it would, you know, there could have been a lot of pressure on him. So he obviously cares a lot about the principle of the issue, and that is that, you know, at the end of the day, you have to follow the rules, and the rules are turn up on time. But, you know, when we start to learn that extra stuff, as you said, as you hinted at, Drew, that this might be a pattern of behaviour as well as is being reported, that for me says that, first of all, I completely back what Arteta did. I'm pleased that he did go public with why it was, but that's why I think we need to also say that, you know, you need to take the captaincy off him. And I know there's people in the chat as well, a few people were saying, just save it to the end of the season, don't ruffle any feather. I understand why you're saying that. I just don't agree, because if you don't want to rock the boat, you shouldn't have dropped him. If you want to drop him and prove a point, then ultimately take the captaincy away. And what I've said before is that I don't actually think he's the best captain anyway. Like, you know, and I think it's a good a kind of a point of incitement of why he can actually do it without necessarily completely destroying the links. Like if you went to Aubameyang and went, you are captain, you keep turning up late, I have to take it away from you because of the rules, I think you'd get that. Whereas if you tried to do it because it's like, yeah, you haven't got enough guts on the field, then he wouldn't like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a good little opportunity for Arteta to reallocate the captaincy, and I think it should go to Tierney because he embodies it. You know, Kieran Tierney's turning up on time with his Sainsbury's bag. Yes, let's go. That's what I'm talking about. That's my captain right there.
I think Sainsbury's is a bit highbrow for Tierney, isn't it? It's from a Tesco boy.
Quick save.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is I think the reason why I felt like it could have been in-house or he didn't have to make it public, because it was kind of a bit of he half told the story. He said it's disciplinary, but I'm not going to speak about it. So it's not really transparent, if that makes sense. So it kind of, the ambiguity in what he did made it a little bit like, well, what is it? Like, does it like, and if we were losing, would he have played him? Like, it just, because he was on the bench, but it was like, it all felt like that's why I say I think it was a very good thing that we played so well and that we won the game and he didn't need him, in effect. But I think if we were 2-1 down with 10 minutes to go, does he bring him on? Does he not? And if he didn't, it would have been a big statement. But I think the main reason why I felt like he shouldn't have made it public at that time was because he never actually said what happened. And it was like, okay. And we only heard it from other sources and leaks. I don't really think that that's the best way to go about it, personally. If the club leaked it, then fine. I don't know where these leaks are all coming from. But it wasn't Arteta that actually said, you know what, he turned up late and that's why I dropped him. He said it's a disciplinary issue, but I'm not going to speak about it. That then leads the conversations in afterwards in the press and all of that. It begins speculation. And if you lose that game and then all the speculation grows, does he address it? Does he not? I just think it leaves an opportunity for people to criticize him personally. And I just think he was just lucky that the game went the way that it went. And not lucky, but if you get what I mean, like it could, if it went, I don't know, if it was the Burnley game that happened and then we draw when we should have won and that situation happens, I think that he's under so much more pressure because of it, because he kind of was transparent but wasn't, if that makes sense. It's like, do one or the other. That's the only reason why I say that. It was kind of in the middle.
But fair, and I know Tom wants to move on, but I think the one thing I would say is we don't know if it was his decision to do that or if it was the club's media plan for him to give the initial hit and then intentionally let people like James, who writes for The Athletic, which is one of the bigger outlets out there, and they do have a connection to Arsenal through multiple sources, so they could have actually given The Athletic that, so they could have been the ones to write about it, while Arteta kind of gave us the initial information. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So
I get you, but I think that's wrong. That's what I mean.
I think it probably would be. I think I would rather hear all of it from just the manager. I wouldn't want to hear half of it from the manager and then half of it from the media. And I agree with you in that portion, but I don't think we can so quickly just say that it was Arteta's decision to only give us 50%. It could very well have been, but I feel like if we don't know, we just have to kind of just like, well, this is what the situation is now. For whatever it's worth, I'm happy that it was leaked because, as Johnny said, like when we knew exactly what it was, it made it a little bit easier to cope with. So, and that's what I think the club has to take that on board moving forward. If it was a decision to handle it this way, then they need to make a little bit of an adjustment, handle it a little bit better moving forward. That would just be my take personally, though.
Yeah, and even when I say about, you know, strip Aubameyang and the captaincy, like I'm not like, this is not going to be a hill that I'm willing to die on. It's what I would do, but there's people making valid arguments for, you know, not rocking the boat. But I just think, for me, as I say, I don't believe in him as a captain overall anyway. I don't think he's a long-term solution there. So I would just get it done because I would much prefer Tierney to have the captaincy, but ultimately, you know, other people's points, I do, you know, this is not the hill that I will be dying on.
No, that's completely fair enough, mate. As Drew said, we're going to move on because we've got a lot to talk about. I know a lot of people in the chat books are throwing in questions to the chat, which is great. What I will say is we do have a 20-minute section now because we extended our podcasts to 90 minutes now, so we're on till 10 o'clock, or most of us will be. I'm sure some of the boys might have to jump off, but there will be time for questions at the end, so if you do have them, keep them in the mind, save them, and we will get to them with the last 20 minutes of the show. Just to give my final thoughts on that, I agree with what in the chat book someone said he was basically put into a lose-lose situation. I very much agree with that. I had to do something. He had to react to it. It's a North London derby. Your captain's turned up late. He has to make a decision. In terms of the explanation, my view of it is that I agree with Drew in the sense that people have called for transparency for so long, and then when they're given it, there are people that are moaning about that transparency, which I do have a little bit of an issue with in a way. So either way, whatever happened, it's worked out in Arsenal's favour, which is what we've got to come on to next. I don't want to spend loads of time on the game itself because we usually spend the podcast talking kind of about what's next. But I don't even want to talk about Lamella's goal because it was the flukiest goal I've ever seen in my life. So moving on to kind of performances and incidents, I want to talk about the penalty because the penalty is kind of... It's garnered a lot more controversy than I expected on social media and throughout punditry and everything else. And Johnny, I'm going to start with you on this one Jermaine Genius and Martin Keown on Match of the Day had pretty much a love fest of how they agreed that it wasn't a penalty by any means. Now, I'll give you my opinion a little bit later on, so I don't influence what you're going to say. I'm sure I wouldn't anyway. But what were your thoughts on the decision? And whatever that is, how did you kind of come to that conclusion of whatever way you thought it should have fallen?
I'm so glad we're actually talking about this, because I've just been having a big debate with some Tottenham friends. I mean, look, guys, I have
friends?
to... I have
what
to put
Tottenham
it
and
out
friends together.
You know, I've known them for a while. I don't trust their judgment, but we plough on with this masquerade we call friendship. But ultimately, as you would expect, they're saying it wasn't a penalty. It wasn't a penalty. And I just cannot understand. I genuinely can't get it. First of all, when you talk about Martin Keown, I absolutely love him and have that tribal loyalty. But I think the man makes so many ridiculous statements about football. I seriously question his judgment. I really do. So often I kind of live by the rule. If you would agree with Martin Keown about something to do with football, the chances are you're wrong. It's that simple. And, you know, my argument with regards to this penalty, why it is a penalty, is this. There is a symbiotic kind of connection to another incident that has happened that just a few weeks ago in the form of Dominic Calvert-Lewin against Liverpool. And this was a chance where Calvert-Lewin ran through on goal. He took a shot, keeper saved it, and then he was running through. Now, Trent Alexander-Arnold slid in front of him. He did not take him out with the initial contact. Calvert-Lewin, in fact, ran into the sliding player who was in front of him, but because he could have had a goal-scoring opportunity and Alexander-Arnold has committed and not got the ball, they gave a penalty. I didn't think it was a penalty at the time. I said it wasn't. But they said that that's the justification. When you look at the Lacazette situation, it's exactly the same. Well, it's slightly different in the form that, unlike Calvert-Lewin, our striker shanks the ball because he can't shoot straight. So he shanks the ball. But the fact of the matter is, he didn't smash it at the ground into Rose Ed. He shanks it so poorly that he could have actually got his own... he could have got onto his own shot, because it was kind of spinning away and it wasn't going out of play. And there is a fair argument that he would have got there before Luiz. So at that point, if Davinson Sanchez commits himself and in any way impedes Lacazette from going on to get that ball that he would have done, that is a penalty by the same rule that Calvert-Lewin's was a penalty. And I just don't get how people can't understand that.
Fair enough. You finished talking just as I was writing out an instruction to Drew and Raph, which is fine. We'll carry on anyway. But in terms of the actual penalty itself, and the reaction to it as well, I really struggle with how that happening anywhere else on the pitch garners a free kick with no exception. Like if there's a late, whatever it's described as a late challenge, it's a foul. It's a foul. Doesn't matter if the ball is miskicked. Doesn't matter if the ball isn't even kicked in the case of Lacazette. If you are recklessly taken out anywhere on the pitch, which he was, it's a foul. And also the argument of Jermaine Genius to say that Lacazette kicks Sanchez, which I found to be one of the most comical lines of analysis I've watched on Match of the Day. And this is the guy that's being kind of groomed to take over from Gary Lineker one day on Match of the Day, which might put an end to me watching Match of the Day, unfortunately. But I get really frustrated with that view, because the amount of times that we see players clear the ball from their defensive third, as they're kicking the ball away, their foot follows through, and often a challenging player comes in with kind of studs coming down to try and stop the ball, and that player will kick the underside of that player's boot, and it's given as a foul, and sometimes even a card is brandished if it's really reckless. And this is a similar one. He follows through with his kick, and it goes into Sanchez, who's lunging in at Lacazette. It is a very, very clear thing. As I said, I didn't want to spend too long on this, and I know that Drew and Raph both share the same view as Johnny. So we will move swiftly on from the penalty decision. As we do, though, just to briefly go back, Chris P, thank you for the super chat. And regarding the Aubameyang incident, he says, I don't think you could drop him completely. If he was late already, who else would have been ready to take his place on the bench? Which is, again, a good point. And I think that with the form of Eddie Nketiah, and maybe there's always that thing is if you want to save the game and we are losing, having him there, you've punished him by not starting him, but maybe bringing him on later if we needed him would have been a better thing for most fans to have seen, I'm sure. Of course, we then talk about kind of the context of what this means, Drew, because I think Arsene Wenger beat Jose Mourinho in the league once during his entire tenure at the club. Arteta has managed it in the space of just over a year in charge of Arsenal. Spurs and Arsenal have had a tenuous kind of competition between themselves over recent years where they have, unfortunately, we admit to say, closed the gap significantly, and we've struggled to get results over them, especially away from home. And this season has obviously been something which we've struggled this season. It's been really down. But from a mental perspective and for what this result means to Arsenal, how do you think it is going to boost this side going forwards?
I don't know. And I think that's the bigger overarching question for me is, can we build any measure of consistency off this for the rest of the season? Because you could argue that consistency has been probably our biggest weakness. 1 minute we look brilliant, the next, we're drawing Burnley. So, you want to go out and beat your rival. And I think, when you look at the fixture list, you look at the North London derby twice and you say you have to go out and win. That's it. And even though Spurs are having, on balance, a better season than us overall, it gives it more incentive as well, because now we in theory can catch them mathematically in the table, so we have a better chance of doing it anyway. So you need to build performances off when you beat your biggest rival in the derby. So I think it could be a catalyst. I just don't know if it will be. I do think we'll go out and beat Olympiacos anyway. I think we would have even if we lost this. But for me, I think what it could maybe do is give the players that additional belief that I think Arteta already has, that finishing top 6 is actually possible. We still have to go and play Liverpool. We have to play West Ham, and we have to play Chelsea. They're all ahead of us, and we're within 7 points of 6th, I think. So that kind of belief in the league, I think the players already believe we can go in Europe. Yeah, I think. Yeah, there you go. So I think Arteta and the players genuinely believe we can go on and win Europa League anyway. I don't think that's in dispute. At least whether the fans believe it or not is one thing. I think the players and the manager do. I think maybe now if the players start to believe more and more that we can actually climb up the table a bit more, which would help the optics of the overall season, especially if we don't win Europa League, then that would be a big achievement as well, considering how we're in 15th for however many weeks. So that'd be a big achievement for us just on the back of that, but also give us renewed belief that we're going in the right direction. And the fact that he has already beaten Mourinho tells you, I think he's up to the task. He's beaten every top 6 manager bar Tuchel, because he hasn't managed against Tuchel yet. So that also shows me that Arteta is willing to maybe, I think he's a man of his principles, but you can say that you can look at all those performances against those sides and say that there was 1 or 2 things that he did differently that he didn't do against somebody else. And that shows the difference between Arteta so far and Wenger in the later years, that Wenger was so staunch about how he wanted to play football. He didn't try to adjust based off who his opponent was. Arteta does to a certain extent. He won't get rid of the base level ethos of what he wants to do, and he'll keep the same overall principles, but there might be slight tactical adjustments he'll make to target certain things. We absolutely targeted Doherty. I think we would have done the same if it was Aurier there, because Aurier is horrific on the defensive side of the ball. He's always caught out of position. He's rash. I think we would have targeted their right-hand side regardless of who was there. And I think that's come from Arteta, and more so than we already do anyway. I think the fact that Smith Rowe had more freedom on the ball than he would have maybe somewhere else in the pitch, I think that's why he's put him on that side. He could have easily put Odegaard there, who can play wide. He could have put Pepe or Saka on that side and moved Odegaard to the right and played ESR through the middle. So I think you see little things like that and know that Arteta looks at his opponent and says, this is their main weakness. I can try to hit it this way. And that's the difference between him and maybe Wenger, since that part was brought up, since it took Wenger never beat Mourinho, but Arteta already has. So I think we can get a lot of confidence from it. That's kind of So I think we should.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it will be kind of a mental boost to the side, and also kind of that build upon the fact that up against big 6 teams, we are being more competitive. We look better in these games. It's something that Arsenal have struggled with a lot during the last kind of decade and more, is to win and pick up points against the big 6 sides. We've taken 3 against Chelsea, and we've got another chance to take 3 more off them later in the season. Of course, we didn't manage to get a win over Manchester City, but across 2 games we lost 1-0 twice, which has been very different in recent seasons. Man United, we've taken 4 points off of Spurs, we've taken 3, and I'm missing someone. Liverpool, of course, we've got to play again after we lost in a game which a lot of people felt that we did compete well in the game at Anfield, and we obviously conceded right at the end when it was 2-1 at that point. Raph, the issue is, Raph, is that there was kind of a few issues at the end of the game. And we did feel like we were hanging on by our fingernails for quite a lot of it. And Gabriel's goal line clearance did have my heart in my mouth for quite a few minutes of the end of the game. But we did come through. But do you think there's cause for concern in terms of game management and how we handled those last kind of 10 to 15, 20 minutes of the match, especially considering we had a man more than they did?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've just got to manage the game better. I think it's an issue that I think will improve but I think it's something that's plagued us the whole season. I think if we could if you look at the Wolves game when we were in complete dominance. Obviously, I don't think it was a red card in a million years, but we're still in a position where we go down to 10 men and lose a game we should win. You look at the Burnley game in complete control and lose it. The home Burnley game, even when we were in poor form, we were in complete control, lose our heads, lose it. You look at the Olympiacos game, Benfica game.
I think we're losing you, Raph, ever so slightly. It's just something about Raph's internet and Spurs that just go synonymously together, it seems. Johnny, do you want to kind of continue the point on what Raph was saying about how you thought and how we might have to deal with that in the future moving forwards?
Yeah, I see. If there is a negative out of it, this was one of the things that I looked at and I was like, that disappoints me, just because ultimately I thought we were completely in control of the game. We were the most dangerous team by a long, long way. We're the only ones who look like doing any damage. And I would probably have more sympathy for the fact of us getting nervous and falling back into ourselves if we didn't see them go down to 10 men. But they've got a player less than us. We're dominating possession. Our players, we've got some good subs that are coming on and having impacts as well. And I just thought that fear set in, and I want to see that eradicated from the team as soon as possible, because we can conspire to find ways to lose in the way that Raph was illustrating earlier in these games, and in those big games where you are talking a bit about facing quality opposition. Obviously, Harry Kane was there and very nearly did some big damage at the end of the game. In these big games when you are facing fearsome opposition, the simple facts of the matter, you've got to be switched on. And, I thought there were a number of players who started to go into their shell. But luckily, we still had enough kind of grit. And don't get me wrong, we deserved to win the game, because that's what it would have been, an absolute sucker punch if they had got something out of it. But ultimately, I think that will come with maturity and with the team playing together and learning like the setup of the team, what Arteta wants from them. I think they'll grow to be able to see out games like that much more readily in future.
Drew, I want to ask you a question around something that me and you have disagreed on in the past, and this isn't me digging you out because it's worked, I promise you. Emile Smith-Rowe and Ødegaard playing together is something I really enjoy. I really like the fact that Emile Smith-Rowe is versatile enough to play in kind of a wider role, but it's not a wing position. It's kind of like a 10 that's skewed out to the side, which drifts inside and combines and is fluid with the more natural 10, which in this case is Ødegaard. Now, we disagreed, of course, around January time about the type of player that we should be targeted to bring in as kind of backup or competition with Emile Smith-Rowe. Has your view kind of changed on that? Is it still the same? Do you think we should be prioritising Smith-Rowe as being kind of the guy to be our number 10 for the future? Or has his success in kind of versatile positions convinced you that maybe signing an Ødegaard or Ødegaard himself in the summer would still be a smarter move now? I wasn't digging you out, I promise.
No, I know. I know you well enough to know when you are, and then I would obviously kill you later, so it's fine.
On my wedding, probably.
That's correct. Live on TV.
Which Mike will be recording, obviously.
No, I think my initial reaction to the Ødegaard move was no one would have known that Saka was going to be moved to the right, thus vacating the left-hand side for maybe some place for Smith Rowe to go and find minutes in. I think a lot of angst for me personally was that fact. I know that Odegaard can go out and play on the right particularly, but also on the left. But again, no one saw the Saka move and how that's come off, and everyone assumed it would just be Saka left, Pepe right, or Willian right, and then Odegaard and Smith Rowe would rotate. But I think from what you saw from Smith Rowe in the derby was you could see some. I hate to do this, and I know people are going to take this out of context, but you could see similarities and more. You could see a little bit of how Jack Grealish operates when Smith Rowe was out on that left-hand side. It wasn't just about being a winger; it was about being a wider, creative player, knowing when to come in centrally, but knowing also when to stay out wide, combining with the overlapping run, being able to combine with the forwards, bringing other midfielders into play as well. So it was more of a comprehensive all-around performance from a wider player, and I think that's maybe something that we've missed down the left-hand side for quite a while. Even before Sanchez, I would say. So I think that could be something we look at moving forward. I think that might depend on how Pepe gets on at the club. If he starts firing in fine form, obviously he's going to want to get more minutes. But I think you could see Smith Rowe there. First of all, he works. So in terms of helping cover Tierney and tracking back, and he's a good presser. So there's that. The fact that he can combine well, the fact that he has good spatial awareness, understanding when he's on and off the ball. These are all things you want to see from modern wide players who were just more than touchline wingers. I think Arteta wants to be more expansive than that, and you see that at City as well. And you saw that when he was there, but you also see it since he left. When you have Foden out there on that left-hand side, he's more than just a touchline winger. He's very much akin to somebody like Grealish as well in that same vein. So I think it could work long term. And even if we don't keep Odegaard there, if we don't get a move in the summer or extended loan or deal, whatever it might be, if he's not here next season, there could be an argument to make that we could still want to bring in a creative central player and keep Smith Rowe wide. And people forget that Smith Rowe started out on the left through his youth development. He was a winger predominantly when he came through the academy. He played centrally, but he did play out on the left more often than not. So he's familiar with it as well. So something that it makes tactical sense to maybe look at that as an option. And also it gives Arteta options. He might not play there every time, but that's something that we've spoken about before. And I wonder how Johnny feels about that as well, is that I view Arteta as the type of manager that in his attacking players, he wants them to be able to be utilized in multiple different deployments in different ways and maybe even different positions. And that's something you see across the top level, not just at City, but you see it at Bayern quite a bit, where they, like Sané can play on either the left or the right. Gnabry can play on the left or the right. Thomas Müller can play across the entire front three, even at center forward. City have the same thing. They can have 16 different front threes, and really they all work together regardless of that fact. So I wonder if maybe that plays to that fact, that he wants more modern attacking players who can just you can just utilize them in so many different ways, and it gives you so many options. And I think that's a huge thing looking forward.
I definitely think that's a good point, and something that I was thinking in terms of, whether we even talk about Smith Rowe on the left, they're all interchanging. And this is what's encouraging, because we're starting to see a little bit end game with regards to Arteta's offensive tactics, which, is what I've been wanting to see for a while. Obviously, defensively, he's gained plaudits previously, but obviously in the really poor run we had just before Christmas, there was just a complete disillusion. We didn't know what was actually trying to be achieved anymore. And I think when you talk about Odegaard and Smith Rowe, something that doesn't really get discussed or brought up enough for me, and what makes this work, is that Smith Rowe is fucking rapid. He's really, really fast. People he's not. Smith Rowe and Odegaard are not the same player. Smith Rowe was roasting Doherty yesterday, actually absolute on toast all the time, and to the point but I was saying it yesterday on Le Grove, the fact is when you talk about a player who is looking like he's playing at Hackney Marshes, having to go, can someone help me out here? Because I'm getting skinned over and over again. It's that kind of stuff. And that was purely because not only what Smith Rowe offers. Not only can he take the ball in close quarters, dazzling feet, can turn you in a phone box, he also has the ability to knock it in front of him and say, "I'll race you to it," and he'll do you. And obviously, with the added threat that Tierney poses on the overlap, Doherty's getting twisted blood. He can't handle that stuff. So I think that, if Ødegaard and Smith Rowe had similar pace levels, you couldn't play Ødegaard on the left, for instance. He can't beat anyone. He's just going to keep turning in. You could argue good delivery, but it would get very stilted when it goes out to left. Whereas Smith Rowe has the pace to be able to play on that wing, but then he offers so much more because of his excellent technical ability, I think showcased most prominently when he took that shot from about 25 yards and produced world-class talent. It with the studs, little control, whack, and that, it looked like for everything it was going in the top corner, but it was just a glimpse of someone who is really developing into being quite a special talent for Arsenal.
Yeah, I'm so excited about him because he's been called up as well now to the official Euro 21 squad for the summer, which is great. There was always a small hope in my heart that maybe he would do enough between now and the end of the season to get a full senior debut. That doesn't look like it's going to happen, but there is an incredible amount of talent now in this England side, especially young players coming through. I mean, I put a piece out today talking about the players that didn't make it. You've got Saka, of course, who now looks like not being in the under-21s. He's a shoo-in now for obviously the senior England side. Foden, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mason Mount. There's so many. Jude Bellingham as well. It looks like he's also going to be in the main squad too. And even in the under-21s, we've seen Reece Nelson dropped from that side. Callum Hudson-Odoi's in there. Mason Greenwood's in there. England just has so much young talent coming through, which is really exciting. I feel like the Germany squad 10 years ago in that same kind of vein, that there is so much talent coming through in England now, which is a nice change because it used to be so boring watching England friendlies, but now there's an actual reason to tune in to see, especially when there's more Arsenal players in there, which we've also suffered with not having for quite some time, frustratingly, although I think Mainsley's inclusion in that squad might be coming to an end just at the wrong time for him. Before we move on to the final section of the show, which is, of course, your questions, so if you've got some, be holding them ready and saved. So when we get on to the last 20 minutes or 25 minutes of the show, so there is something that I want to discuss because I've seen the video go around. I was going to talk about it with Raph, who has unfortunately had to jump off because his internet's completely gone from his whole building, he claims, is what he says. So that's the reason why you won't hear from Raph unless he jumps on towards the end. But Drew, Harry Kane is a person that has become villainous, of course, amongst the Arsenal fan base. But for me, this guy just gets away with so many things in games. There was always the thing he used an aerial challenge, which meant that, of course, the player on top of him would fall to the ground like Gabriel did in the home leg against them and really injure themselves. I don't know if you saw the video of him again with Gabriel, where the ball is firmly kicked away by Gabriel and Kane charges into the Brazilian defender with absolutely no intention of winning the ball whatsoever. And I understand it's not the denial of a goal-scoring opportunity like we've seen, where all the big discussion around when a player doesn't go for the ball and goes for the player. But I feel like these incidents of pure kind of it's nothing to do with football. It's nothing tactical. The only thing about it is trying and attempting to hurt the other player. What are your kind of views around this discussion, and how do you feel that it should kind of be dealt with, I suppose, by the officials in the future?
I mean, personally, I'm so for me, it might seem harsh, but I think for me, it's a red. The ball's nowhere near it, but it's also it's the manner of it. You can see it's clear that he never even made an attempt to get the ball. He just happened to be 55 seconds late. It's clear that his sole purpose was to try to take out Gabriel. And for me, that's a problem. And what people aren't talking about is the way that he comes into Gabriel can actually cause more serious damage than people think. You can easily get concussed when that happens. For base level, you could easily have a dislocated shoulder immediately after that. You could. There's a lot of things that could have happened.
When you struck it, so
there's anything like he could have ended up with a considerable injury off that. And again, it's because he made no attempt to play at the ball. He was never looking at the ball. And in the stillness, you could see it. He was never looking at the ball and thinking, you know what, I can maybe try to win this. And he had plenty of time to pull away from Gabriel after Gabriel passed it away in the first place. So at that point, what is it? And people are trying to excuse it, saying, "Well, he's had a frustrated night. He's just clearly frustrated." It's like, well, that doesn't really matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to anybody. And the thing for me is like, it's so clear that certain players get certain rules, and I tweeted about this, and it got more interaction than I thought. When I watch Harry Kane, I'm literally seeing Alan Shearer's reincarnate on the pitch. Alan Shearer did the same bullshit at week in, week out for the majority of his career. Whether it was at Blackburn or Newcastle, he was just leading with the elbow, always, and just, but it was clear intent, it's just like things like that. And he got the same treatment. No one ever came down on him. He, same thing, like best English center forward available, all this kind of stuff. Some of the same sort of narrative that surrounds Kane surrounded Shearer, and they get the same treatment, and then the same excuses are made for both of them. So for me, I think it's clear as day. And I think it just speaks to the narrative that I think certain players and certain clubs are held to a different standard in the Premier League. So, yeah.
I certainly think that, as you stated there, Drew, and I think Matt G said it in the chat, it's the fact is the England captain, so he's allowed to assault people. You mentioned Alan Shearer there. We all remember when he kicked Neil Lennon in the head. I think it was Neil Lennon or one of the Leicester players. No, it was Neil Lennon in the head.
Yeah.
I mean, anywhere outside of a football pitch, and it shouldn't be on the football pitch, you get arrested for it. It's an actual assault. But because you're England captain, you get to play on. And I think he scored a goal in that game as well. And the fact is I do think personally, Drew, I'm against you a little bit on I can't see how that's a red card personally. I think it's a late challenge and a yellow for me. I get what you're saying, but at the end of the day, he could hurt someone, but there's loads of stuff where people could hurt.
Orange card, sure.
The orange cards, exactly. But no, for me, I think a yellow would have done it, but a yellow, for Harry Kane, it just doesn't seem to be forthcoming. He can do whatever he wants. And it's not just flagrant fouls like this. It's totting up as well, getting away with 3 or 4 fouls every game and just never getting carded. But yeah, once again, I think we all, we're not saying anything really revolutionary here. He's England captain, so he gets an extra couple of kicks on people than everyone else.
It is question time in the chat box. So if you could start throwing your questions into the chat, we will try and get through as many in the next 25 minutes as possible. I know, Johnny, you might have to jump off a little bit early. That's fine. Just let me know in the chat and I'll throw you off. Not throw you off.
Get out of my pub.
Don't say that word. It's been so long. As you can tell, I went hat-free today because I just had to unleash. I'm going to get to your levels soon, Johnny, of just the hair that's coming out.
Oh, yeah, they look like dreadlocks are on the way there, Tom. Definitely.
Might take a while. Deary me. Lewis Kiriakou says, devil's advocate. Drew, I'm throwing this to you, mainly because it's an Emil Smith-Rowe question. Tom, Arteta wanted a creative mid in the summer and has improved us defensively despite Partey's absence. If we'd got a Cam, then would we be in top 4 as our form since Emil Smith-Rowe versus Chelsea suggests?
I don't think it's that simple. There's too many examples in football that show that just because you get the players in doesn't mean that the form is going to be the end result. I think there's too many things that have to happen after you get the players in for us to say that we needed to finish top 4. We could have got the players in and our form could have been just as diabolical. And let's be honest, the reason why we had such a slow start to the season wasn't just because we weren't creating chances. We were poor in every department. So getting that 10 it only fixed one aspect of why we were poor. So no, I don't think we would have finished top 4 with the player. I think maybe we wouldn't have needed to go get Odegaard, obviously, in January, and maybe the creativity aspect wouldn't have been as bad for as long as it was, but there are too many other issues across the pitch for me to confidently say we would have been 4th. And even with a 10, I don't think we're good enough to be 4th right now in the first place. So that's a whole other discussion, obviously, but you could maybe argue that maybe we would have been top 7 in theory, but again, I don't like to speculate too much, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Go on, Johnny.
I was just going to say, to be honest, I couldn't agree more with Drew there. To be fair, it's not as simple as football maths. Add this piece, and then we're already there. The whole point is, even the people who've kind of been constantly bought into what Arteta's been selling all this way would have to have realised that we were not always kind of where we are now. It's been a process, and I don't think that even again, those people who can see it happening, they would appreciate that. It's taken a journey to get here, and some players needed to do some learning, and some players, quite frankly, needed to hit the door, which we've seen in January, and that's been positive. So, and I think Arteta needed to learn as well. If you look at some of the squad selections early on, the players who he was constantly putting faith in, it was just ridiculous. And so I don't think just having Jose Moir here, for instance, would have meant that we were cracking in the top four. And I'm not sure if we did have him, whether Emile Smith-Rowe ever would have broken through. That's the thing. Arteta, I think, found Smith-Rowe out of desperation and ultimately stumbled across something that has kind of really worked out well for him. And then now, through that initial kind of genesis, has driven with that and created something that that fans can all start to see is starting to bear fruit now.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I do think there is an element of, if Arsenal had have had, say, a natural number 10 from the start, the levels of creative the drought of creativity that we experienced at the start of the season wouldn't necessarily have been as present as we saw. We had one in the squad, being Mesut Ozil, of course, who was omitted. There are reasons to that. Maybe that will go on something as a sword that Arteta kind of died on in the first half of the season. But I think we've seen from his performances at Fenerbahce, or Fenerbahce, as Hugh Izzy will tell me it's actually pronounced, that I don't think it would have changed too much in the grand context of things. Thibaut Pest asked an interesting question, which does lead into kind of the opposition that we play next week, Drew, asking if we think that we could still finish above West Ham United. Just before you answer, for context, we do play West Ham next week, and we are currently 7 points behind them, who are currently in 5th. So if we were to, say, win that game, how do you feel about our chances of making up that ground?
I mean, I think at that point, anything is possible. And again, there's something you, me, and John, if I remember right, spoke about. I think maybe French as well, that there's certain clubs that are ahead of us at the minute that are performing above 100%. They're overperforming 105, 110%. And whether they regress to the mean or not is the question that needs to be answered. But I think if you beat West Ham, I think at that point they would have lost 3 of the last 4. So you could then argue that, and again, only 4 points out. If we go through into the quarterfinals of the Europa League, we're going to be on good form at that point. So again, it is possible that we catch them, but to interject, just to tell you, their remaining fixtures are quite favourable. They have ourselves, then Wolves, Leicester, Newcastle, Chelsea, Burnley, Everton, Brighton, West Brom and Southampton. So they only play Chelsea, Leicester and Everton after us from the top 10. I mean, I take that point, but I think this season has shown anybody that anybody can beat anybody. Doesn't matter if it looks favorable on paper. There's so many ways to trip up. West Ham could have an off day against Burnley and lose, and Burnley are probably better than people give them credit for in the first place, just as an example. So that's why you need to be consistent. And up to this point in the season, they have been consistent, and we kind of really haven't overall. And now, post-December, our consistency has improved, and now they might be hitting a little bit of a bump in the road. So I think it's, if our biggest thing we've missed this season is consistency. So if we find it, I think we can. It's just, it's going to depend on them as well. There's too many other variables. You know what I mean? Like it's in our hands, but it's not. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we do have to say bye to Johnny. Did you want to have some final say on that question? And then shoot off?
That would be great. Yeah, just, I'm pretty much in agreement with Drew there, but ultimately I do think that we could be in danger of thinking about West Ham in their classical sense, that they will always fold. West Ham have been very good this year, really good. And I think they've been better than us. Obviously, the league table doesn't lie. And I don't think that, they were unlucky against United at the end of the day to come away with a loss there. They're quite a resolute team. They're hard to be broken down these days. So I wouldn't bank on us finishing above West Ham. I think they have a pretty good start now. And I wouldn't say that we're playing necessarily particularly better than them. I think, it'll be touch and go. But ultimately, where our season really exists now for us is the Europa League, and really progressing in that competition. It's realistically all that matters. I don't think anything we do in a league outside of that great result on the weekend really is going to bear much significance. It's Europa League or bust for us, and we've got to go hell for leather to try and win it.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. Tell people where they can find you, and not physically, of course, just your channel and everything else. Especially in lockdown, that'd just be inappropriate. It's many anyway.
So find me virtually. I have a YouTube channel called U2B, as you can see in the name tag there. Do check it out. It's kind of, this Arsenal discussion, obviously, and me reviewing different games. So it would be great if you could come by and drop a little sub and join the discussion. And I also do a fatherhood podcast called the How's Your Father podcast. It's kind of funny, irreverent chat about fatherhood. So if you want to leave Arsenal alone for 2 minutes and think about something else, then check out the How's Your Father podcast. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, mate. I'll see you soon.
See you later, Drew. Bye, Tom. See you guys.
Have a good one. Massive thank you, of course, to... Hold on, Drew is not the host of this show. There we go. Oh, no, look. There we go. That's much, much better.
The worst.
That's where he belongs. A massive thank you to Johnny for coming on this evening, and of course Raph earlier on. We are still going to be here for another 20 minutes because me and Drew have a lot less full lives than everyone else, it seems. So we'll be here to answer your questions also for the next 20 minutes. Quickly before we do, just a reminder that the podcast is available not only on YouTube but audio-only platforms too, with Spotify and SoundCloud and iTunes, and on iTunes specifically. There's been some very, very nice people that have left some 5-star reviews. If you do enjoy the content, it would be really, really helpful to us if you could go over to iTunes and just leave a nice review. I mean, Drew hasn't even left one yet for me, so just do it before Drew does it, because I'm gonna have to end up paying him, and he's expensive. So if you could just drop a nice review, that would be very, very kind. Obviously, only 5 stars is what we want. Anyway, getting to the questions. The danger of having Drew on now is that we may only get through 2 of these. So we'll try and get through these. I'm only taking a bit because he threatened my life earlier on today.
I threaten your life like 5 times a week, but people shouldn't really know that, so I don't know why I said that.
So Kevin says, who was speaking, I think, to me earlier on. I think Kevin sent me an email earlier on today. If I've got it wrong, I'm really sorry because that'd be so awkward. But I'm pretty sure Kevin did. He did indeed. He sent me an email that's from, I can't remember what the game. I think it's called Categories. I don't know if you have that in the US, Drew, but it's like
we're not in the Stone Age, for Christ's sake. I know we had Trump as president, but
you have
I know what categories are.
So for those that don't know, from my memory of playing this game, it's effectively saying like you've got a certain amount of time. I think it's a minute or 30 seconds, and your category is like something random. And for instance, Kevin, while playing this game, got a category that was things that fly. So Drew, guess what was one of the things that could fly on his 10-point card? Have a guess.
I don't even know.
How many can
no
you
idea.
name? You should be able to get one. Come on, who is the mascot of our podcast?
Oh, really? Cedric?
Yeah. No. Yes, Cedric. Cedric was on the card, Drew.
I had to. That was a dig. I know.
Flying fish were on the cards, along with aeroplanes, bats, birds, butterflies, flying fish, gliders, helicopters, hot air balloons, kites, and paper planes. So there you go. Arsenal should have been on there because they are high flying at the moment. But in answer to Kevin's actual question, it was: would anyone still take Ceballos on a permanent transfer in the summer?
You can handle that one. I'll go after you if you want, but yeah.
My answer is no. Now you go.
Yeah. My answer is no. Moving on to the second of 2 questions that we'll get
just to briefly elaborate on that, I think what we've seen from Ceballos is basically if Ceballos is going to play, he's not going to be playing as a 10, which means he's going to be playing as one of the 2 pivot players. To get Ceballos, you're looking at probably 20 million minimum to get him in. And if we want to spend money on that position, we need to spend it on a player that upgrades upon what we've already got. Ceballos doesn't get into our team right now, so I think that gives you pretty much the answer that you need right now. Glenn Cook says, after the report of Alba leaving the stadium soon after the game and skipping the warm-downs, will this have an effect on his inclusion on Thursday? I've done this a lot earlier, but briefly, do you want to cover that?
I mean, maybe. depends on how Arteta wants to view it. But it's also on Oba. Getting discipline doesn't mean you have to stop doing your job. If any of us mess up at work, our boss lets us know what happened, and then you move on from that. You take it as a lesson, and you progress. So I think it's more on Oba now than Arteta. I think he'll force Arteta's hand. Either he comes good and he has the right mentality and everything is fine, or he starts throwing out multiple toys, and then it makes Arteta's job easier. So we'll see. Like, for example, we don't know. Like, maybe he just doesn't turn up for training, say tomorrow, as an example. If that happens, then he's probably not going to play. In fact, he might not even play for a while. But if he himself settles down and it's fine, then we'll be fine and he'll play. I don't think we need him on Thursday in the first place. I think we're so comfortable against Olympiacos. I think he might just get rested, period, because we're going to need him moving forward in that competition, and arguably we're going to need him in the league as well, as long as things are okay on that front. So yeah, he might get rested by default anyway. So.
Oladapo asked a question earlier on in the chat, which I was gutted that it was so early on and not in the question section, but I called him out on it because I wanted him to say it. And effectively, I'll read out what he said here and then I'll elaborate on it further. He says, I love Tierney just as much as the next person, but I believe that people are calling for his captaincy because he is as close to that as kind of a Vieira / Roy Keane mould that we are yearning for, or necessarily which kind of player is captain. Which he's talking about there is, he's effectively saying that there's kind of an obsession, I suppose, about people that want that classic British or Irish, in the case of Keane, captain that's a no-nonsense, tough tackling, leader of men, kind of in front of an army or a battalion of men shouting freedom at the top of their lungs is the type of captain that people want. Do you think there's an obsession around that kind of concept of the captain, one that maybe
100%.
you don't necessarily need?
100%. We've talked about it on this podcast before, I think, and I think everybody's spoken about it for a while. Everyone has this notion that captains have to have like a bullhorn ready and just screaming at the top of their lungs for 90 minutes. And yeah, that's one way to be a captain, but there are multiple ways to be a captain. You still should. It's about taking responsibility, taking ownership, and keeping yourself and your teammates accountable. It is about leadership, but leadership can be found in different ways. So, yeah, I do think it does play a role. I think the fact that people do look at him and see maybe some semblance of a bygone era about Tierney's game in certain aspects, which is, people mention the fact that he tucks in his shirt. That's what I mean.
Give him the arm back.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Like his shorts are like on his belly button and it's tucked in. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like people look at that and think, he's got what it takes because that's what they remember as a captain to be. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But it doesn't mean that's what your captain has to look like. And I do appreciate that he does have leadership qualities, but just because he embodies what some people might miss about football doesn't make him automatically the best man for the job, even though I think he would be one of the candidates. So,
yeah. Hal asks, there's a question for you guys. Do you rate Yokoslu, the Turkish defensive midfielder at West Brom, who they brought in, I think it's from Celta Vigo, if I'm right. He looks quality and very talented, a cheaper option in the summer. The reason why I've highlighted this question, Hal, is because I really want to kind of get forth the point that Arsenal need to, this summer, it's not for me about cheap deals. It's not about bargains. It's not about looking for a hidden gem. This summer for me is about signing a player that is going to go straight into the team and upgrades upon what we've already got. I'm well aware that the order and a hidden gem could effectively do that. A hidden gem could be that player, just like West Ham did with a Kufau or a Souček. It is very difficult to identify those players and then for those players to transition immediately into the first team and have an immediate impact. But for me, Arsenal need to be spending a significant amount of money, which I know is tricky in a pandemic, but hopefully through player sales and maybe further investment from the owner, which has happened in previous 2 windows, we could see it happen. And if it does, we need to be signing players that are going to impact things straight away. We need to be looking at players, in my view, between kind of the ages of 24 to 27, 28, that are going to come straight into the team and have an immediate impact and are in or approaching their prime. Drew, I saw some facial expressions that might not necessarily mean you agree with me, but tell me your views on that concept, I suppose.
I think how this season ends is going to dictate the kind of business we can do. And I think so. You could argue that both avenues have merit, but again, I think it's just going to, like, if we go and win Europa League and get Champions League, even if we finish, at that point, doesn't matter that we might finish 8th or 9th because we're in Champions League, and Champions League is one of the primary ways you bring in better players. And I stand by the fact that the only reason why we got Thomas Partey in is because we still offered some semblance of Europe. But it mattered that he wanted to come to the club for sure. But I don't. If we didn't have Europe, I don't know if he would be here right now. And I think that's kind of the question that we have to ask. So if we don't win Europa League and we don't get Europe through the league, and we say we do only climb up to 8th, and that's where it ends, that's going to affect a lot of things. It's going to affect the budget. It's going to affect revenue. It's going to affect our attractability for other players who might look at another option because that option has Europe, and then we're no longer maybe say their first choice. So I think how the lay of the land plays out come the summer is going to dictate the kind of business we can do. I think if we're in a position to bring in those players that you want and that you keep writing about, I think we should. But I don't know if we will.
No, like you keep writing about them. Stop.
No. I'm saying you should keep writing about it because there's so many names that you're bringing up that a lot of people won't be paying attention to. So that's why I want you to keep doing it, because I think there's a lot of value in the market for good players that don't have to be the names that maybe the fans want, but they are players that can come in and make us better. But if we can get them, it's going to depend on a lot of factors beyond that. We're a bigger club. So I think, I think how the season ends depends on who we're going to be able to bring in. And then when we know what we have to work with, then I think the picture becomes clear.
Speaking of that article, I have just left a link in the description and in the chat box where you can go and read that. 5 realistic Thomas Partey partners for him. Some might say that some of them on this specific list aren't as realistic as some of the other ones, but I do try to explain why I think some of them are achievable based upon their club circumstances and their circumstances specifically as well. But there are some you might go, I'm not so sure about that, but it's the point about reading it and identifying the style of player that I think we need to be looking for in addition to the profile of player that we need to be looking at. So Oladapo, your question about any left-sided midfielders, go have a read of that list and hopefully that'll answer your question. Vincenzo says, what is the future for Willock next season? I mean, Drew, in my view, it's to sell him in the summer. So are you in agreement with that? I think we've covered that pretty darn well.
Yeah, move on.
Yeah. Let's scroll up and see if I missed any early on. A similar question, I suppose. Sidant says, does Maitland-Niles, I now call Maitland-Niles until he starts putting on good performances for Arsenal, still have a future at Arsenal? How is he doing at West Brom?
I don't think he does. I think maybe he could, because I think he could bring a lot that we might crave in a certain position, but I think he doesn't have a future because maybe he wants to play in the midfield, but he's not going to be able to. Maybe it could be that simple. That's why he won't have a future. But I look at how we've been performing since Boxing Day, really, without players like Maitland-Niles and without players like Guendouzi, and you could argue that we don't really need them. You know, our season's gone on just fine without them. So if we were to sell Maitland-Niles, we shouldn't feel like we're worse for wear. You always want to focus on the squad, obviously, but if you sell Maitland-Niles and bring in a different squad option that's better than he is, then you don't miss him, do you? I think it's just a matter of the fact that he's come through the academy, so you hope he makes that at the club. But similar to players like Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah, I think that they should be viewed as players you can sell on for straight profit because they came through the ranks. And you look to like you talked about, you look to bring in players that immediately are better, that can do more than Maitland-Niles can, that are more consistent, that are able to tick the boxes where you need reinforcements, and we're the better for it. So.
Yep. Let's scroll up a little bit more. I'll scroll down and see if anyone has just joined. In fact, Chris Grillo has just joined. Says, what are your thoughts of losing the likes of Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe, given football is a business, a la Liverpool selling Suarez? Do you think there is a threat to us losing the likes of Saka and Smith-Rowe?
I
think there's more of a threat to lose a player like Martinelli than there is over those two.
I think
he bought in, etc. I
think it'll also depend on where the club is. In 3 years' time, if we're still languishing between, say, 6th and 10th, we have no chance of winning the league. We aren't getting Champions League, and a big club that comes in for Saka, I think he would be doing himself a disservice if he didn't want to leave. And you can also speak to the fact that maybe you could laud the fact that he might be loyal to the club because he holds the club in such high regard, because he's coming through, because he's a lifelong supporter, and you take that. But it's harder for players to want to stay if they truly want to go on and win something in their career. It's harder to convince them to stay if they aren't getting that. And if he did end up leaving, I wouldn't fault him for it. You know, I think I always like to make sure I don't get too ahead of myself in terms of what players can be, but Saka can be an absolute world-class player. You could argue that he's already on that track right now, and it won't be long before he is, in theory, depending on who you talk to. So if he had the chance to go to play for someone like the Bayern Munich of the world, then I'm okay with it, because then what you do is you take the big fee we would get from him, and then you say, we move on. We take that money, we invest it properly, and then we look to keep building the club. And sometimes it might take one of those big signings you don't want to see leave to help you move forward. And that's exactly what Liverpool did. No one wanted to lose Suarez or Coutinho at Liverpool, but they did. And now look what they've done with that money. Look at where they got to without them. So if that ended up being what happened with Saka, it would suck initially, but I'd be fine with it as long as we made the most of it. I would absolutely hate it if we didn't make the most of it and then we stagnated or got worse post that move. Then I would absolutely lament it probably for the rest of my life. So it depends. Like, lots of shades of gray, but I don't think we'll be able to keep on to all our good players, because I don't think we're a club that can. I don't think loyalty is enough in football anymore. I think a lot of young players want to go on and have brilliant careers, and they want to go win things. And if we're not providing that, eventually I think they're just going to leave, and we have to come to terms with that.
Final question of the podcast talks about a player that we haven't actually touched upon much today, but he did create the pass which set up Lacazette to earn the penalty, and what a pass it was. Yo-Yo says, Pepe is approaching his prime. Why can't he be Aubameyang's successor, having been used for his area abilities in the past by Arteta, and can play in different areas of the pitch? This is an interesting question, not one I wanted to disregard just by simply saying Pepe's not a striker, what we're talking about, because I have thought about Pepe centrally. I feel that if Pepe's played centrally, it needs to be alongside someone rather than as an out-and-out striker, someone that he can feed off of, that can link up with, someone that he can play close to as kind of a second striker. A little bit like how Lacazette has played off Aubameyang in the past, just not very successfully. But I think Pepe is at his best, weirdly, when he's nearest goal. I think that despite his poor finishing in some of the previous games we've seen, he is one of the better finishers in the team and has shown that with some of the strikes that he's made this season. I'm not sure if he's the guy to succeed Aubameyang necessarily, but I do think that there is scope for him to have more of a central potential in the team. Drew, what do you make of Pepe? First of all, in generally where you see him, and the question specifically.
I mean, I still rate him. It's unfortunate that he's not come on as well as you had hoped, given how much we paid for him, even though we got completely fleeced. The fact is we invested that much money, so you want a bigger return than he's given. But I still think he does show in glimpses what he can do. It's just, again, it's our biggest Achilles heel on so many levels is consistency, right? So if he can find consistency, I think he'll come good. Whether if his future would be in the middle or not, I don't know, but it's actually a fair question, because you could look at a lot of points in his game. You could see maybe he could work as a center forward, but maybe not as a kind of center forward we would need in Arteta's system. So that might require some tactical adjustments to really make it work and sound that out. But just a part of his game, like he loves to, he can play off the shoulder. He's very good on the ball. He can hold the play up if he needs to. You know, he's got that quick first step. He can get center backs in trouble. Like, there's a lot to his game that you would like as a center forward, I think. But rotating players when they hit their prime and trying to just shift their entire trajectory, it's difficult. So I don't know if maybe that ship has sailed, but you could look at him as like a second striker, as like a Mateus Cunha as an example, who can also play on the wings. You know, but predominantly he's better through the middle, and he is better in a more forward role in combination with the bigger center forward like Piatek. So just as using Hart as an example. So yeah, I can maybe see it, but I just don't think it'll happen. But it's a fair question to ask. It's a good one. Thanks, Yo-Yo.
Yeah, I think it is a fair question for sure. That does conclude today's podcast. It's been a really, really good one, talking about the North London Derby and the successes of it, looking a little bit ahead, looking at individual players, the controversies of the penalty and Aubameyang's omission. Just before we wrap up, if you are watching live, you've got a job to do, because you are going to go straight from here and you're going to go and watch the Gooners pod, which is currently live with Mike and Andy and Owen. Of course, all big fans of the show. And when you do go over there to watch them, please make sure you leave a comment letting them know that we sent you over there. And before you do that, please make sure you drop a like on today's video and subscribe to the channel. And of course, give my 3 fantastic guests from today's show a follow on Twitter. You can find Drew at Logic Larry, you can find Johnny at Johnny Cochran, and you can find Raph, who did disappear but is in the chat box, I believe, at Messy Music.
It's okay, we'll pick on him on WhatsApp later. It's like, what happened?
Just take the mick out of him. That's all we do in that chat. It's just taking the mick out of each other. And you see French and John getting into heated debates about some very political stuff. Deary me. Speaking of which, I will be back with John next week. We're planning on, because next week is the week without any European football and without any midweek games. Probably the best time to do the next LTA, Let's Talk Arsenal podcast, where we talk a little bit more about social side of things with Arsenal, social media, how things have reacted. We're going to talk a little bit about celebrating opposition injuries and the perception of that a little bit, because that's something that's come up in the news. Might have different views to you. I think it's something that gets slightly blown out of proportion in a way in comparison to some more concerning things that happen across social media. But it's going to be a good chat, I think, as it always is with John. But thank you to my fantastic co-host, right-hand man, Drew. Much appreciate your time, mate. I know I'll give you some stick, but I love you, and there's only one reason to have you on here, because it's you're good with what you know. So
yeah, no, it's always good to be here with you guys. So thanks for having me as always.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I don't know what's happening, but also thanks to the chat. You guys in the chat do an amazing job. Even when we get frustrated with you and you say things that make me roll my eyes, which is probably about once an episode. I appreciate the fact that you're all here every time and you're participating and you want to be involved in the debate, and I really appreciate that. So we thank you for that too. So yeah, good to be here as always.
Props to people as well in the chat box and everyone who watches back and listens to these, because I know that one of the things that we struggle with across Arsenal is stubbornness and not changing minds. Me and Drew are both guilty of that at times. We will admit to that. There's a fantastic comment here from Neil Cooper, who just says, Tom, I'm finally coming around to admitting we are improving. I think the quality of players we have got in the past 2 windows are much, much better than what came before. And it's stuff like that. And while we continue to try and be as positive as possible and try to think level-headedly, that we see comments like that, even when I disregard Zamir's comments for the entire podcast. Sorry, Zamir, I just didn't see them. Mate. Thank you so much, everyone in the chat box. You've been absolutely brilliant. We've got the likes of Yo-Yo, Kevin, Zamir, Obi. We've got Mikey, Tebow, PM1 on Twitch, because we're streaming on Twitch as well. Tried to Twitch, no option to like. Oh, I don't know. I don't use Twitch. I just stream on it. That's what I use it for. But thank you, everyone that tuned in today. Matt G, thank you ever so much. And of course, we can laugh at Spurs because it's always great when we beat them. But I hope you've enjoyed it. Please drop a like on today's video. Please, if you have just a spare 2 minutes, go over to iTunes and leave a 5-star written review. We would really, really appreciate it. Give all the guys a follow and ourselves at the Goon Talk TV. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. with Clive from the Arsenal Vision podcast, which is going to be a really, really good chat. And as I said, if you're watching live, please go over now to the Gooners pods and listen to some more Arsenal content with Mike, Andy, and Owen. This is always a laugh for those guys. And they will be back with John in the international break for a quiz during the interlull, which I'm going to try and host if I can put one together on the channel. But we'll see you again tomorrow, 5 p.m. UK time. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you as always. And as always, up the Arsenal.